I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. And this is Currents. Looking for God in all the wrong places? Help may be right around the block.
We're surrounded by God in the city, and to not see Him is a tragedy.
How to invest and have a clear conscience.
And it's never too early to learn how to stay safe from fires.
We learned how to stay low and follow the wall so we don't breathe in the smoke.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Do a Google search and you're bound to find a lot of how-to guides. How to protect yourself from scams, how to get the most money back on your tax refund, or even how to find and watch some good TV. Hint, hint, you know where to find that, right? The list is endless, of course.
And tonight we're going to show you some other how-tos. And we start right here in the heart of New York City. A city that for a lot of people can seem unfriendly, uncaring, even just downright hostile to so many. So it's no surprise that some people might not find it the easiest place to have faith.
Well, this is true, but last fall, the Cathedral of St. Patrick's Young Adult Group hosted a talk on just that very topic. Father Joseph Tyrrell was the speaker, and his topic, well, it was how to find God in New York City, of course.
It'd be really terrible to live in a place where we couldn't find God. That would just be about the end. When we were kids, we thought about God. And then as we got older, we had specific ways of looking at God, maybe in church or in the Bible. As that grew more sophisticated, then we started shutting out the outside world. We said, oh, God is in the church. But outside the church, well, God isn't out there. And as a result of this, we lost touch with the fact that the whole world is God's. And the great thing is then, if we get this, is that when we live in God's world, we rejoice with His presence everywhere.
New York City itself is a very secular town, and there are a lot of distractions. People are always running, people are always on their BlackBerry, their cell phones are always on the move. So when do we find time to stop and pray and work on something that's very important, and that is our relationship with Christ? And if we work on that, then we can find some peace, then we can understand how to deal with the problems that we face every day.
Oh, the subway traffic, the commute, people at work. There's so many moments during the day where you don't see God, and it's good to remember.
We always sort of talk about our coworkers and a lot of the challenges that we face in the workplace, even amongst our own Catholics in New York, who, they sort of seem to be running in all these different circles and not really finding that happiness that everyone is setting out to find. And we all know deep down inside that the reason why nobody can find this happiness is because they're not looking for the right thing. They're not looking for God. They're not looking for Him in the right way. So we were like, why don't we do something about finding God in this jungle that is New York City?
My contention is that we're surrounded by God in the city. And to not see Him is a tragedy. Let's find out where people find God and help them to relate with that, or to connect with that more in their lives.
I find very much in my marriage. And I try to find them in whatever I do, like keeping myself open to the workings of the Spirit and with my conscience.
I like what he said about going out and seeing God everywhere. It's the little things. The blackout was an example of just people helping each other, and just times of either stress people have come together, or just, in an everyday day, I see people helping each other all the time. So it's motivating. It helps you remember that there is God in the city.
Now the great thing is, when we realize that we're living in God's world, and when we rejoice in that world, then when we come back into the church, this place where we had developed a relationship with Him, then we realize how much more special that is. And we know that we're even closer to Him.
We'll have a couple of other how-tos later on in the show, but stay tuned. When we return, we'll have the day's headlines,
including the Obama administration's embryonic stem cell policy hits a roadblock.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Coming up just a bit later, some Queens kids get a lesson in fire safety.
But first, let's check today's headlines. A federal judge Monday stopped the federal government funding of stem cell research. The preliminary injunction says that practice violates an amendment applied to federal spending bills that prohibits taxpayer money from going to pay for research that destroys embryos. The Justice Department is reviewing Judge Royce Lamberth's decision. Last year, the Obama administration issued guidelines to allow federal funding for embryonic stem cell research, doing away with stricter Bush-era rules. Some scientists believe embryonic stem cells could help treat many diseases and disabilities. Now, pro-life groups applauded the judge's decision. Among them was the Alliance Defense Fund, which said, quote, "The American people should not be forced to pay for experiments that destroy human life." Well, debate continues to rage over the proposed Islamic Center near Ground Zero. Earlier this month, former Speaker of the House and recent Catholic convert Newt Gingrich compared plans for the Cordoba House to Nazis wanting to put up a sign next to the Holocaust Museum or the Japanese putting up a site next to Pearl Harbor. Well, today, another conservative lawmaker said that rhetoric went too far.
I think he's overstepped his bounds, and that I think he'll suffer the consequences for it because it was over the top. I mean, to compare this imam with Hitler and the fact that there are mosques within that area already, and that he ignores the fact that there are strip joints in this area, and he has to go after an imam that is trying to bring people together. Yeah, I think for a bright guy like Newt Gingrich on some of the issues, I would say politically he's made a major mistake.
Well, Texas Congressman and former presidential candidate Ron Paul went on to say that people should not blame Islam for 9/11. He said you have to blame only al-Qaeda. Well, another dispute involving religion is emerging at Ground Zero. St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church was destroyed during the 9/11 attacks, but now church officials are pushing to have it rebuilt. Religious leaders held a news conference alongside former New York Governor George Pataki to call for negotiations over the church's reconstruction to resume. The church says the Port Authority walked away from talks about public funding for St. Nicholas.
This expresses not the concern simply of our own community, but of people across our great nation and the world to see this little church rebuilt. A church that was established in 1916 by Greek immigrants to this country and which had become a haven for people of all faiths who would often stop by, light a candle, and offer a prayer regardless of their ethnic, religious background.
Now, almost 9 years later, as the others take shape, there not only has been no progress made in the reconstruction and rebuilding of St. Nicholas, there is not even an ongoing discussion with the Port Authority officials. And by the way, after September 11th, it wasn't just I who said we are going to see that St. Nicholas is rebuilt. It was the leadership and the officials of the Port Authority as well.
A Port Authority spokesman told reporters the church rejected a deal to build last year and made more demands. Police in Suffolk County, Long Island, are looking into the apparent theft of human remains from a cemetery run by the Diocese of Brooklyn. Investigators say someone broke into 3 mausoleums at St. Charles Cemetery in East Farmingdale during the overnight or early morning hours. A casket was removed from one of the mausoleums and human remains were stolen. Police are still looking for suspects.
A new police report says the British government and the Catholic Church conspired to cover up for a priest suspected in a Northern Ireland bombing that killed 9 people back in 1972. The report says a Catholic cardinal played a part in getting Father James Chesney transferred out of Northern Ireland, which was under British control at the time. The report says the cardinal held a closed-door meeting with Northern Ireland's Secretary of State to discuss moving the priest. No one was ever convicted in the bombing. Cardinal Sean Brady, the current leader of the church in Ireland, said today, quote, "The Catholic Church did not engage in a cover-up of this matter." Security will be tight when Pope Benedict travels to the UK next month. In fact, it will be so strict. One church spokesman went so far as to describe security plans as draconian. Pope Benedict will beatify Cardinal John Henry Newman on September 19th in Birmingham, and the diocesan spokesman there told British media he had never seen security like this. Security for the event is being coordinated by the government, not the church. And remember, we will have special coverage of the Pope's trip September 16th to the 19th right here on the net. Pope Benedict's latest book on the life of Jesus will hit store shelves next year just in time for Lent. We get details now from Rome Reports.
The second volume of Pope Benedict XVI's book, Jesus of Nazareth, will be published on March 13th. Vatican has decided to launch the Pope's book on the day which will mark the Passion, Death, and Resurrection of Jesus, the first Sunday of Lent next year. The book consists of 9 chapters and will be launched in 20 languages. Meanwhile, Benedict XVI is continuing work on the third and final volume of the book. This part will look at the childhood of Jesus.
And community leaders announced the final plans this week for the lighting of Brooklyn Borough Hall in honor of Mother Teresa's 100th birthday. Borough President Marty Markowitz, along with other elected leaders and church officials, will gather tomorrow night at 7:30 to shine blue and white lights on the building. Markowitz announced in June that Borough Hall would be lit in honor of the revered nun after owners of the Empire State Building turned down a request to illuminate the city's tallest building in her honor. Borough Hall will remain lit through August 29th. And for more information about celebrations of Mother Teresa's life on her 100th birthday, go to currentsny.net and click on Riding the Wave.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more Currents coming up.
Just ahead, we'll find out how making good investments can be about more than just money.
Welcome back. Well, earlier we began uptown to learn how to find God in the big bad city. Well, right now we continue our series of how-tos on the show tonight with a trip downtown to Wall Street, where greed and corruption have certainly taken their toll. But as we are about to find out, that's only one side of the coin. There are companies out there doing some really good things, things that may even align with your faith. And our next guest is certainly someone to speak to about faith-based investments. She's Mary Brunson of Investing for Catholics, and I had a chance to speak with her by phone yesterday. Mary, thank you so much for joining us on Currents today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Mary, we know that it's tough economically out there for a lot of people. Many people are still out of work. Some of them are really struggling to just put food on the table. On the other hand, there are some people that still have jobs and they do have some finances that they do want to invest and use to plan for perhaps their retirement or for their child's education and college, those kinds of things. Why is it important to invest Catholic, which is the focus of your organization?
Well, you're absolutely right that it is very difficult right now for a lot of people. But the bottom line is we have to not be looking at the next 6 to 12 months, next 2 years even, but we need to be looking at our long-term prosperity. And the best way to do that is through risk-appropriate investing in the stock market. But specifically to the Catholic effort, it's very important for Catholics to stand behind their faith and to put their faith front and center in all aspects of their life, not just their investments. But what's key here is that as Catholics, when we invest Catholic, we're able to align our pew intentions, if you will, with our investments. So it's important to be able to stand up and say, you know what, I'm Catholic, and there are certain types of investments that, as a Catholic, I cannot tolerate.
So what specifically can you do with your organization in terms of helping keep Catholic social teaching in mind with investing?
So what we do is we take index funds and we screen them for Catholic values. Specifically, what we do is we will apply an objective measure of acceptability for various aspects of Catholic social teaching. For example, when it comes to for-profit healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and abortifacients, participation in investment in those companies stops at $1, meaning there is no tolerance for it. But in order to maintain the integrity of an index, we follow the supply chain down to a logical conclusion. So we would look at companies that earn 20% or more of their business revenue through the production and or sale of military weapons or weapons of mass destruction as being unacceptable.
Right, so that's kind of getting into my next question, which is what is the criteria that you use in order to select companies to invest in?
We would also exclude any companies that are engaged in certain for-profit business activities in or with the Republic of Sudan, companies that earn 15% or more of their business revenue from the production of or sale of alcohol or tobacco. Gambling is cut off at the 20% or more level. pornography at the 15% or above level. In doing it this way, we're able to strike out the most egregious offenders who do not belong in our index but still maintain the integrity of an index, in order to enable Catholic investors to hold fast to their principles and still have an expected return that's in keeping with what they need for their retirement goals.
And Mary, finally, let me ask you this. How does the return on an investment, a Catholic investment, differ from what might be a return on a normal investment?
The Catholic portfolios are structured in such a way so as to protect the expected return to the greatest extent possible. So what that means is we key these Catholic portfolios off of a full equity index portfolio that may have as many as 12,000 companies. By the time we have our Catholic screens in place, that full equity portfolio gets drilled down to 4,700 companies. So we're looking at more than 60% exclusion. But they're structured in such a way so that we have efficient diversification. What does that mean? That means to the end user, the returns differential of a full equity index portfolio versus those of a Catholic portfolio are virtually indistinguishable. So you can invest according to your principles and sacrifice very little, if anything, in the way of return.
Okay, well then that's a great answer. We know that the investments that are going to be made in a Catholic fund will pretty much yield the same ROI as they would otherwise. Mary, thank you so much for joining us on Currents today. That's all we have time for.
Thank you.
What I think is interesting is they do some of the thinking for you, so you don't have to go out there and pick and choose every single thing, so that you can kind of trust that in general it aligns with your principles.
Right. You don't have to spend all of that time. Of course, we were talking about earlier in New York City, for those viewers, of course we have viewers around the world on the World Wide Web, but for those viewers who live in New York City, especially, we're talking about how busy life gets in the city. And you don't often have a lot of time to go, okay, research individual companies and see where the money goes and what it's used for and all that. Do I want to invest in them? So they kind of take out that
yeah, they said weapons of mass destruction, the Sudan, alcohol, pornography, tobacco, those are the kinds of things they really stay away from. And so it's really good to know that they're out there, and I'll post a little bit more about that on the blog too.
Oh, very good. Well, stay tuned. There's much more Currents coming up. When we return, in the heat of summer, young people in Queens learn fire safety.
You should never leave the fire on the stove when nobody's home.
Finally tonight, we've seen the hazards inherent in big city life, all of life actually, including the risks in financial investing. And our final how-to is how to not get burned by yet another hazard, a real one like fire.
Well, the New York City Fire Department recently brought their smokehouse to Immaculate Conception School over in Astoria, Queens, with the goal of teaching kids life-saving fire safety lessons. Our Natalia Ortiz was there to check it out and pick up a tip or two.
These children are pretending to escape a fire as part of FDNY's ongoing fire safety program for children. The firefighters recently made a stop at Immaculate Conception School in Astoria with a special truck called Experience House. The vehicle is customized to look like the interior of a home and contains mock-ups of hazardous scenarios which are used to teach children what to do and what not to do in a fire. Though this fire safety program was designed for children, fire officials mentioned common mistakes adults make too. For example, forgetting to replace the battery in your smoke detector. And that's not all.
Everybody plugs everything into one socket. And the only two things are supposed to be plugged into the socket. 2 items, that's it.
Lieutenant Hans said leaving lit candles unattended is another dangerous but common mistake. And there are quite a bit more. So with so much information, how can they ensure these children will actually remember it all?
How effective do you think that what you're teaching them is? Like, do you think that they actually go home and have these conversations with their parents about getting a smoke alarm and getting a meeting point?
Well, we're hoping, anyway. We're hoping that they do that. Some of them do. There's some of them that grab it, and some of them don't. That's why we come back to schools every year. And every year we teach them. And if they take home a couple more points every year, eventually they'll get home.
So I asked the children what tips had stuck in their minds.
And you should never leave a hairdryer in the sink. You should never leave the fire on the stove when nobody's home. We learned how to stay low and follow the wall.
Okay, and why is that important?
So we don't breathe in the smoke.
Good. Hey, so you remember those two things.
But not all the kids remember the ins and outs of fire safety. Clifford does not have a meeting place chosen already with his parents. Now, this is not that uncommon. Clifford, what are you going to do about this?
I don't really know.
Well, are you going to go home and have a little chat with the folks tonight about maybe creating one?
Yep.
Okay, and do you have any ideas of where this could be outside of the house? Maybe a neighbor's house or a tree somewhere?
Inside my own house.
No, outside, Clifford. All right, it's okay. We're all learning. And that's what this event was all about.
I just stop, drop, and roll or something.
Yeah,
right?
well, that's if you're on fire. That's what
okay,
you do.
See?
But we bring the smokehouse here. We'll let
Right.
Francesca walk through.
I probably haven't even changed the batteries in my.
The smoke detector, yeah, and you know the smoke detector and the carbon monoxide detector as well is important to have in the house. Also, and change those batteries every 6 months. You know, they always say change them when the time changes, so that way they're changed roughly every 6 months. So, you know, when you spring forward and when you fall back, make sure you change those. We don't have to do that.
And that's a real nifty truck that they have there to bring to
yeah.
the kids, you know. But a lot of, over the years, doing reports in the field over the years, kids playing with matches or with lighters or people smoking in bed and falling asleep.
Yeah.
Those are really the big hazards. So good to just sort of be aware of that too and prevent those.
And two, they were going to say it was modeled after the inside of a house or an apartment. It was it's probably bigger than my old apartment.
I know, mine too.
I would love bring it on by. Does the stove work? Bring it on by.
Well, that is it for this edition of Currents as we live in our little studios.
Right.
Tomorrow we have a different kind of sister act, including the story of an Ivy Leaguer following a faith that just might surprise you.
But until then, you can always catch us online. We're over at currentsny.net. If you have a question, maybe a comment or a story idea, send us an email. We're over at drop us a line at currentsny.net. That's our email address. Well, for all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Thank you so much for watching and have a great night.